Hello, my name is Simon and I will be your guide and your host through this short course. I'm going to suggest that you have two needs at the moment. One, is this topic of relevance to me? And two, is this guy worth listening to? So if I chose to put them on the screen, I would have a string of letters after my name that relate to project management and the topic of stakeholders and the like. But I don't choose to put them on the screen because I think that the whole industry idea of qualifying people and allowing them to use post-nominals has gone a bit silly. It no longer, I think, communicates value. And I also think that publications like this one, which I am expert in, rather lost the point about why we did all this stuff in the pursuit of money for exams. So I haven't put all the qualifications up there, but I do have 40 years experience of doing this stuff, and I've learnt a bit while I've been doing it. So I'll leave the question of whether this guy is worth listening to up to you to decide in the next minute or however long it takes you to come to those conclusions. The question about whether this is relevant to you, I think the answer is yes. All of us are in situations where we have people around us who influence us and who we influence. And that applies as much in our social as all our other spheres of activity. Although I am in this conversation going to focus on the idea that we are either a formally appointed or an accidentally appointed project manager or project participant or organisational manager, leader or team member or participant, which I think probably pretty much covers everything really. And in those contexts, so the business, the organisational, the club, any group of people trying to achieve things, as soon as you get into the situation where you're trying to achieve things through other people, then we are in the situation of trying to understand and influence and the word that's not in any of the books and is perhaps the better one, the least acceptable one, the most honest one, is manipulate. We are seeking in stakeholder engagement, in stakeholder management, to understand people's opinions and to harness those opinions to achieving outcomes, or recognising when those opinions are counter to our interests and being able to behave appropriately to pursue the interests of either ourselves, or if we're in project environments, our sponsors, or if we're in organisations and operations, the aims that either we generate or are handed to us. And that's what we're going to do in this conversation that follows. Understand how we might use our and other people's influences in order to be able to better achieve our and other people's aims. Or, perhaps I shouldn't be saying this, frustrate other people's aims. No, I'm not actually going to go in that direction. I'm going to cover the positives, not the negatives. So, if you still think you're with me, let's head into the next slide. Okay, let's consider a project. But it doesn't have to be a project, I'm just giving it context. A project is a journey taken by people together. And it's delivered by the efforts of a team. So if we're going to start considering stakeholders and we're going to get some practical how-to, one of the things that we're going to need to understand is how do we build teams? And I think to build teams, a first step is to understand what one is. So I think it would be good for you if you pause the video at this point and considered the question, what's a team? And you might approach that question by asking, what are the characteristics or properties, strengths and weaknesses perhaps, of a team? So pause the video and think, what is the definition of a team? What are the characteristics of a team? Is this welcome back? I'd like to test your definitions now. On the left-hand side, I have a picture of a group of people. And I don't think they're a team because they don't have one of the first characteristics of a team, which is a common goal, a mutual endpoint. And I think that that is illustrated by the group of people at the bus stop. So all the people standing at the bus stop have a common aim here. Their interest is to climb on the bus. As they take that journey, they will, however, get off the bus at different times. And as the bus proceeds, people at different bus stops will get on. So these people are not a team. Although that's not to say that every member of a team needs to join and leave at the same time. And those people at the bus stop, not being a team, do share a common aim. So common aim is one characteristic of a team, but not sufficient to actually define team. To be sufficient, we need what the people on the right-hand side have. Now, the people on the right-hand side, if I try and describe them, I have to say they're a tug-of-war team. I have to use the word team to describe them. And the question is, what's the essential characteristic that they're demonstrating that makes them a team? And the test with your definition of the team was, did you identify it's a group of people with a common aim who are mutually dependent upon each other in order to achieve that aim? If you did, give yourself a pat on the back, give yourself a gold star. So a project team, or any other team, is a group of people who share a common aim and are mutually dependent upon each other to achieve that aim. Now, we might go a little bit further and say things like they have a set of skills that together are complete. And we could point out that they don't have to have the same skills, but between them they have to have all the required skills. Just like they don't have to get on or off the bus at the same time in order to be sharing a portion of the journey. So now we know what a team is, we should ask the next question about stakeholders. But let's just recap. Be good if you paused and recapped for yourself, because that repetition will cement it in your mind. But my recap for you is a group of people with a common aim and a mutual dependency upon the capabilities, which often means skills, but not entirely. Let's move on. When we start looking at stakeholders, we need to ask ourselves the question, which stakeholders require, deserve, reward, etc., the most amount of time and effort spent on them? The challenge with stakeholders is not all stakeholders are equal. And the first step in the stakeholder process is to consider who are the stakeholders. And the simplest answer to that is everyone. But that very rapidly then begs the question, how do I cope with dealing with everybody as a stakeholder? And the answer that comes from that is, well, we need to separate or segment our stakeholders into those who have the most relevance or significance to us. And then we ask, well, how do I determine relevance and significance? And that's where we ask the power and interest questions. So maybe one of the ways in which we start to do that then is it's time for a tool. It's time to sort of understand how we might start analysing our stakeholders. So step number one in stakeholder engagement or stakeholder management is to identify who our stakeholders are. And as soon as we start doing that, we get an enormously long list, because our stakeholders are everyone. In fact, you might pause now and just consider, for any context you like, project, piece of work, club you belong to, just the people in the same street as you, or possibly even the people who get on the same bus as you in the morning, assuming that you get on a bus. What's my list of stakeholders? And as you build that list, you maybe want to think about trying to analyse it and dividing it in different ways. And I'm going to draw you a picture here with a bit of luck. I'm going to draw an axis in this direction, and I'm going to say there are some stakeholders who are positive, and there are some stakeholders who are negative, and stakeholders live somewhere on that spectrum. and stakeholders have power. So we could say the other axis was interest. And that power and interest may relate to the outcome, or it may relate to the journey. Now, the reason that I said to you earlier that the textbooks are not very good is because the average textbook just draws us the top right hand corner quadrant and says power and interest, and it goes from 0 to positive, and it doesn't. It goes from highly negative to highly positive, and it says that they have power, and yeah, they do, but their power relates to things like outcome and enabling and external to the project, and journey and achievement and internal to the project. So I'm going to say that the people down here are the team. And now I want to do some analysis or some thinking with this model. Now I've drawn the axes for you, the next question is to say, how am I going to use this diagram? So the first question that I have for you is to ask the question, what about the folk in this corner? They have an interest in the outcome. They're probably external to the core project team, but they're definitely deeply concerned with what we're going to achieve, and they have power. So these are the folk that I am going to ask for help from. That was a P. The sort of help I typically want is resources and budget and authorization. The next question I'm going to ask is, what about the folk who are here? They don't have power, but they have interest. So my observation is that if I can group them together, I move them in the direction of being more powerful. And then they can be helpful to me. So now I've started to think, where would I put people on this grid? And you might like to pause and put your list of people on the grid, but I've got a little more explaining to do first. Well, not first, you can pause whenever you wish. The folk who are here also have power, but they are mostly neutral. So these are good people to ask for advice, because their opinions are likely to be unbiased, and either of the extremes are likely to be people with bias, and I typically don't want bias when I'm asking for advice. I do want bias when I'm asking for resources, positive bias, not negative bias. And there could be a question about what do we do with these people, and the classic mistake is to ignore them. So we won't ignore them, because if they group together they get power, and if we've made a mistake, then ignoring them was a bad idea. And then the next question is, what do you do with these people? And the obvious answer is to keep them separate, because you don't want them gaining power. And then the next question is, what do you do with these people? And the answer there depends on, or the acceptability of the answer there depends on how political you are, because you may move as far as misinform and keep off balance, or I don't know what other responses you might think are appropriate. What I will say is that if I want to influence these people in the hope of moving them in this direction, then it's probably these people who are the ones that I should engage and ask to do that. And in asking them to do that, they will only take action if they have a balanced opinion that what we are doing is good, is good stuff. So the conversation between the neutrals and the negatives is generally the way in which I would like to be able to engage conversation with the people who are negative, to move them in the direction that I think is right. I've only filled in half this picture so far, so I should fill in the bit down here. These are my key team members. They have enthusiasm and energy, and they are capable. And I may have folk in the middle here. That is to say, they are also capable, but they don't have enthusiasm and energy, in which case I have not done the stakeholder engagement process well enough. And the journey in this direction is very often accompanied by the initials, what is in it for me, or them. And it's establishing the what's in it for me that will likely move people in that direction. And if I have people in this quadrant, they're in the team and they are negative, then again I think we have some politics to deal with. But here we have some politics that there's no doubt that we have to deal with. My advice to you there would be to remove them from the team, or to escalate to your sponsor the fact that these folk are in the team, because this is the source of things like sabotage. And I could talk about environments where I have seen sabotage actually happening, like different parts of geographically different parts of a business with interest in the same work, and deep concerns and fears about their security of employment, actually sabotaging things for other groups. But I'm not going to be more specific about even which industry that was in. This picture is only half drawn. Let me swap colours so that you can now see where I'm drawing in. Let's go with a light blue. The thing that we really need to understand is that all stakeholder management activity, engagement activity, is merely a precursor, merely a component of creating the communications plan and executing that communications plan. And every project management text I know of makes the assumption that the project manager is the spider in the middle of a spider's web, and that is not correct. Or if it's anywhere near correct, it's only partially correct. The component part here is I probably, as project manager, need to put myself over here. Not hugely powerful, not officially powerful generally, but with, I hope, a high degree of interest. If I'm over here, that is to say negative and not powerful, then we are in trouble. I need to go and find some allies to increase my power, and I need to move into the direction of positive, or I need to get out of this activity. So project managers probably over there. There's loads of people on this diagram who are going to be in places like this, and there are perhaps people in this diagram who are going to be in places like this, and I hope there are people on the diagram who are in places like this. And very often I'm not entirely sure where they are, so I probably ought to put them on the diagram in terms of a range. And I ought to say then that this person is in that range. But I'm not going to keep drawing that because it will make the diagram rather messy. And in fact, I'm actually even going to get rid of that circle and those axes. Although I do think that they are relevant. I'm only getting rid of them because the diagram will otherwise get too messy to be able to see clearly. So I've said to you already, when there are folk in the middle of the diagram, we ask them for their advice. And we ask them also to be the interface, perhaps, to other parts of the organisation where a direct conversation between the positives and the negatives is not so useful. So actually what I'm doing with this diagram is not asking the question, not just asking the question, who has power and interest. I'm asking the question, who influences who? So what this diagram really ought to be titled and described as is an influence map. Notice I've marked it at the top with a typo of stakeholder power and interest analysis. The analysis bit is asking about the influence. So point number one, perhaps, to understand is the project manager is not in the middle of every conversation. The project manager needs to establish that conversations between other stakeholders, particularly across the team, are going on. Not to be a participant in every one of those conversations. If you're a project manager in anything with domain areas that you are not expert in, and you get yourself in the middle of every conversation, then you just screw the conversations up at best, and at worst, and at best you just slow them down. So keep yourself out of the conversations you don't need to be part of, but make sure those conversations are happening. So as we do stakeholder analysis, we're really building communications plan. And as we do communications plan, we are asking the twin questions. What information needs to come to us as a project team? And where do we get it from? Who is accountable for giving it to us? How do we ensure that they provide it? And what information as a project team do we need to pass either to each other or to other stakeholders? And it's not, as project manager, what's all the communicating I need to do. It's as project, what's all the communicating everybody needs to do. So now we have an analysis tool, and you can see there are two parts to this analysis tool. And there are several steps. And the steps run, identify all your stakeholders. That's a very, very long list. Draw a line somewhere along that list that says below the point where I want to actively try and engage them, and their names would have gone somewhere like that in the middle of the picture. In fact, let's even swap colour and go for a red colour and say this is the area where there are very many stakeholders and we don't pay a huge amount of attention. We make sure that we monitor them, that we keep them broadcast informed, but we perhaps don't engage that much more. And then outside of that picture, who is communicating with who? And just going to put it in pink. I want to make sure that there are strong communications here, and I'll just do it with a circle. I want to make sure there are strong communications down here. There is a formula out there. I'll write it on the board where I've got some space, which is something called Brooks' law or Brooks' equation, which says the number of communications paths in a project is n squared minus n. If this wrote nicely, it would be coming out okay, over 2. And that's true if everybody speaks to everybody else. So that might be true if you've got a team of 5 or 7 people. It's not true in a project of 125 people, because you have groups within that 125 people, and the n squared minus 2 applies to the 5 or 7 or maybe even 10, no, probably not to the 10, in each of the groups. And then each of the groups need to communicate with each other in some fashion. But now we're moving a bit ahead of ourselves in terms of the communications management conversation. And I'm not going to go into the depths of the communications management here because we're focused on stakeholders. So, where was I? I was talking through the steps. Let me recap those. Number 1, identify all the stakeholders. Number 2, draw a line across it. That's the people that are inside the pink circle in the middle and the ones who are not. Plot the rest on this picture and identify who is already linked together and who you would like to be linked together. And maybe, if you're very political, who you would not like to be linked together. And you might also, and I'll put it in green, consider one other aspect here. I'll put it in green if I can get the pen to come on. That there's really a third axis in here, which is the topics over which people have commonality of interest. Not everybody's interested in the same topics. And so this is actually quite a complicated space that we're trying to model here. And that's one of the reasons why stakeholder analysis and stakeholder engagement is a challenge for us all. Because we need to actually identify that there are ebbs and flows and sub-conversations going on across the project. But if we just go back to the simple bit, who are the stakeholders, who matters, who talks to who? And when we get to communications planning, which will be a different course, we'll ask the question, what conversations are they involved in? How are those conversations facilitated, like they're written or their instant message or whatever else, on what timings and triggers, and who has what roles and responsibilities in it. So now we have asked the question about power and interest, and we've also answered the question about relationship. When I drew you this picture, I'll stick with green, but it is now a very messy picture, isn't it? When I drew you this picture, I said what we need to understand is the what's in it for me. I'm going to circle that multiple times just so you can see it stand out. And the what's in it for me is the motivating factor. Let me go back to my slide here. The what's in it for me is the motivating factor for all the behaviours, all the actions of all the people on this picture. So the people who perceive things as negative will be taking actions to diminish your chances and your impact of success. And the people who believe they're going to get something from it are more likely to be taking actions to support your success, but that's not guaranteed. Let me just repeat that, because that was really significantly important. The people who believe they will be worse off are actively fighting against you. The people who believe they may benefit from what you're doing will be passively not getting in your way, but without a visible benefit to themselves and belief that you can help them achieve that benefit, they are unlikely to be taking action. So your success is based on everybody else's belief that through their mutually interdependent actions, they will get their what's in it for me. Their, from your perspective, their what's in it for them. So one of the things that is crucially important for us as we do these early stages of stakeholder engagement and analysis is to ask the question, what's your success criteria to each individual? They will start probably, because of politics and trust and all those sorts of things, to tell you the corporate good answers, but they won't actively pursue corporate good answers unless they're in a spotlight. What you need is sufficient trust from people that they will tell you their personal what's in it for me, and then your challenge there is to align their personal what's in it for me with the initiatives, with the endeavours, with the organisation's current target, current desires. Because when people see that the leader is providing them with an opportunity to realise their own ambitions and targets and aspirations, then they will contribute. And actually we've mostly now covered the topic that I wanted to take you through. So let's summarise. I've been almost inexcusably cynical up to now, and I keep calling it stakeholder manipulation, and that is definitely not what I mean. At least not in the sense that really when we talk about manipulation, we're talking about being unethical. There's a challenge in the root of stakeholder analysis and engagement and management, which says that we all see the world differently. And what's in my interest may not be in your interest. And if I then start taking actions to make my interests come to the fore, is it ethical of me to take action to stop your interests? Is it ethical of you to take actions to stop my interests? And if you're taking actions to stop my interests, is it ethical for me to respond? And we only have to look at global trade wars or children in a nursery fighting with each other to realise that this is a question that is too complicated to have any sort of answer other than it's situational and it depends on personalities and lots of other characteristics, and to say that whether it's with a big P or a small p, it's all about politics, and that politics is neither good nor bad, it's a fact. It can be made to be bad, and I would suggest that 99% of the time we need to stay out of that territory, but it's not realistic to say that, to ignore it. So the question that we've been answering through the last half an hour almost of content is who influences who? Whose assistance do we need? Who do we need to assist? And what are the circumstances under which mutual back scratching is promoted and is appropriate? So that was our topic.